This eagle's place is in the sky. She's still got a lot of flying to do. You can see it in her eye, though she's cried a bit o'er what we've put her through. She soared above the lifted lamp that guards sweet freedom's door, in the dews, the damps, the watchfires of a nation torn by war. Oh, she's far too young to die. You can see it in her eye. She's not yet begun to fly. It's time to let the mighty eagle soar once more. Let the eagle soar like she's never soared before, from rocky coast to golden shore. Let the mighty eagle soar, soar with healing in her wings, as the land beneath her sings. Only God, no other kings. Let the mighty eagle soar.
Hello, everybody. My name is Andrew Collins. I'm the founder and chairman of the Beloit College chapter of Young Americans for Freedom. Our guest speaker tonight hardly needs an introduction. He was the senator, governor from Missouri, and then nominated by President George W. Bush to serve as U.S. Attorney General. He presided over a very sensitive era in the United States history at the Justice Department and oversaw an historical era of safety and security for the United States. At the same time, he preserved American civil liberties to the best of his abilities and preserving their security. And with that, that will be the topic of his address. And so let's welcome Mr. John Ashcroft to the stage.
Well, it's an honor for me to be here. Thank you for the introduction. I'm grateful for the chance to be with you. This is a beautiful campus and an institution that has a tremendous heritage. It's not that I knew about it, but I looked it up to find out that it started in 1846, and I thought to myself, that was about 25 years before the Justice Department came into existence. And people at that time were more concerned about justice issues and liberty, perhaps more intensely than at any other time in our history. And I noted that hundreds of individuals as a part of this community left the campus here to go to fight in the Civil War on the side of those who would seek to secure liberty and freedom on a broad base for all Americans. That's a heritage of which you should be proud and for which all of us in America can be grateful. The idea that individuals should be able to reach the maximum of the potential that God has placed within them without the restraint that would be imposed on them because of discrimination is a noble idea. It's not one that's always been recognized in this country, but it is one that we seek to recognize, and we seek to recognize it greatly. And this particular institution is an institution that played an important role in that, even long before the Justice Department of the United States came into existence. It was after the Civil War in 1866 that there were serious riots in both Memphis, Tennessee, and in New Orleans, Louisiana. Dozens of people killed, African Americans and white Republicans who were seeking to ensure the opportunity of African Americans to exercise their rights as citizens and vote. In Louisiana, the state of Louisiana convened a constitutional convention conspiring to adjust the laws so as to make it more difficult for certain citizens to vote. And there were demonstrations not only in the minority community, but by white Republicans who ended up while their numbers were substantially less than the black individuals killed, white Republicans killed at the same time. It was as a result of that turmoil following the Civil War, which was characterized by not only that kind of aggressive violence, but also by the roving violence of the Ku Klux Klan, that the Justice Department comes into existence. And few people give Ulysses S. Grant, the President of the United States, the credit he deserves, I think, as having been the single most important President of the United States in the development of a structure that could begin to shepherd the progress of the United States towards civil rights in a profoundly important way as we matured as a country. So it's with that in mind that I welcome this opportunity to come to this campus and to talk about justice issues and about liberty. May I just say I thank you for the introduction. It's very kind of you not to mention any of the elections I lost. I lost an election in 1972, and I lost another election in 1974, lost a big election in the 1990s, and then in the year 2000, some of you may find this funnier than I do, I'm the only person ever having lost his Senate seat to a dead opponent, and I was in the United States Senate. My opponent was killed in a plane wreck. That's not laughable, but I then lost my seat in that respect. Politics has its ups and downs. It's a little bit like a roller coaster. Maybe you would help me just illustrate what politics and the ups and downs of it. Maybe you wouldn't, but I don't know. If I say something rather pleasing, would you mind just saying something like pleasant? Can you say Pretty good. You're not exactly a choir. Let's try it one more time. And if something that's pretty disastrous, you say ooh. Yeah, really disastrous. Ooh. Okay, so I had a friend taking a nice airplane ride. But the airplane had engine trouble. Ooh. But had a parachute on the airplane. But the parachute wouldn't open. Ooh, yeah. But he was headed for a haystack. A haystack had a pitchfork in it. He missed the pitchfork. Missed the haystack. You know, it goes, this is the way politics goes. So thank you for not mentioning the losses, but I have had the privilege of serving as state auditor, state attorney general, a state governor, National Governors Association, all that business, United States Senator, and U.S. Attorney General. And there is a thread that I believe is the stuff of which the fabric of American experience is best made, and it's the fabric of liberty. I think the core value of America is the value of liberty. Some people would maybe want to debate that, and it was advertised that I would talk about the balancing of liberty and security. I would suggest to you that it would be inappropriate to think of them as parallel values, that they are not on parity. I don't think security is a value in itself, as a matter of fact, so much as it is a way of respecting values. You see, I think you should, when talking about security, ask securing what? And I think the number one reason to have security is to secure liberty, which is the core value. Now, if you look at our documents or at the history of the country, it's pretty clear to me that liberty is at the center of it all. I mean, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's right there in the center of things. Even before that document was written, there were the sons of, in Boston, at the Boston Tea Party, the sons of liberty, who dumped the tea into the harbor, who complained about the fact that they didn't have the freedom to shape the way in which their resources, once having been taken, were allocated. There was no representation that would support the idea of their taxation, and they were defrauded of liberty in that case. So I want to talk a little bit about liberty, but I don't want to suggest to you that liberty is to be sacrificed at the hand of security. That the purpose for security is to secure liberty and to make it possible. Now, some people say, wait a second, this security is always impairing my liberty, and it's possible to look at it that way. I would concede that. When I went to get on the airplane to come here, I flew to O'Hare and then drove over here. I expect that's a common way that people come to this campus. You know, I got special treatment, you know, free massage and all that other business. And you know, might say, well, is that security an impairment of your liberty? Well, my view is that it is an enhancer of my liberty. I wouldn't feel nearly as free to fly and as confident about the freedom of mobility in our culture if we didn't have those things that safeguarded the means of transportation. There are those who say that any time you have a law, you inhibit liberty. I don't think so. I think a test of our laws should always be, does it enhance our liberty or not? I wouldn't even mind having a liberty impact statement for when we're considering whether to pass a law. Will our freedom be enhanced? Will it be greater as a result of what we're doing, or will it be less? Now, some of the philosophers say, well, if you're in a total state of nature, then you're the freest of all. Well, maybe, maybe not. If you were in a state of nature and you had no law against murder and rape, would you be freer in that state, or would you rather be freer if you thought there was some restraint on individuals who might abuse you with some crime of violence like that? I'd tend to vote in favor of the additional freedom and liberation that came with the safeguarding of my person and my physical being. And liberty, then, to me, is this core value of American culture. You know, whether it's Patrick Henry saying, give me liberty or give me death, it's part and parcel of what we believe in this country. We're trying to live up to it, and we're living up to it more aggressively and more successfully than ever before, in my judgment. Now, there were times, you know, when we've been attacked, when liberty has had to yield to the necessity for security, but only because absent that yielding, we would have an impaired liberty in a significant way. I was thinking about, matter of fact, it affects everything about our country. It affects foreign policy. I was thinking not long ago about our foreign policy, and we seem to ask two questions of a country that comes into a new regime. We ask, were you democratically elected? And really, that's one question. And if they say they were democratically elected, we do two things. We fund them, and then we recognize them, and then they do a couple things very frequently to overrun the liberty of people, either discriminating against people or executing people, but you know, I think our foreign policy would be better served if we maintained liberty as the core of what we're doing, so that when there's a new regime that emerges somewhere in the world, we ask, how do you view liberty? Is it a core of what you believe in or not? And if it's not, we shouldn't invest them in our recognition or with our funding. Because liberty is the key and core value, I believe. I think it's with liberty that we have human existence that reaches the maximum of its potential. That's true in literature. It's true in the documents that frame the country's beginning. I love the poetry on the base of the Statue of Liberty. It says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Interesting. I love poetry. I mean, we all learned that, I think. We did somewhere around the 5th grade. There's no qualification. You know, really a powerful belief in liberty expressed there, because Emma Lazarus, who wrote the poetry from an immigrant family that came, of Sephardic Jews that came from the Iberian Peninsula, come to this country. She said, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore, send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me. You know, it doesn't say if you didn't go to Beloit College, you can't apply. says, give me your tithe. There's only one criterion that she singles out in the poetry. She says, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. People who come here for freedom's sake. And then if they come, that catalyst of liberty is so powerful, doesn't matter if they're the tired, the poor, the wretched refuse, the huddled masses, whatever it is, the way to turn ordinary people into world beaters is to add this special sauce, if you will, of liberty. That's what America's all about. That's why America has the story that it has. Look, it is wrong for us to believe that as Americans we're better than other people. I mean, it dawned on me. I grew up in an environment that suggested to me, well, as Americans, we're better than other folks. Then I looked around. How can we be better than other folks? We are other folks. We just have the privilege of being involved in a setting framed by liberty and opportunity, and most profoundly framed that way, instead of being framed by regulation and repression. And people who come here for liberty's sake have a different experience than people who would come for other reasons. That's one of the important reasons that I think we ought to consider what kind of culture we have, is because what we have here will determine who we attract. For instance, if we develop a benefit society so that people come here just for benefits, we'll attract a different kind of people than if we have a freedom society when people come here for freedom. I one time put it this way: people who come for freedom, they're going to be really good for us. People who come for free stuff, I'm not sure so much about. And maybe some of our immigration policy isn't anybody's fault but our own. That if we have a culture that is seeking to attract people with free stuff, we eventually are going to have a hard time paying for it and a hard time providing it. But if we ask people who come here to come for freedom, not for free stuff, you could be amazed at what might happen. One of my favorite immigrants was the guy who started U.S. Steel Corporation. His name was Carnegie. Some of you know about Carnegie Libraries. He came here, I think, about a 6 or 8 year old, was penniless. As a young person, an immigrant, he becomes the richest person in the world, building the world's largest steel company. Incidentally, this town here is familiar with steel works and iron works in a special way. But not only does he come here and build it, but 90% of all of his income eventually goes to helping other people have opportunity. And you know what happens. Most of you are from towns, I suspect, that have at some place in the history of the town what's called the Carnegie Library. Andrew Carnegie built 2,600 or 2,500 libraries all across the country to help enhance the capacity of others who came here looking for freedom, not just free stuff, to prepare themselves to take advantage of this opportunity-laden culture called America, which has a core value of liberty. And it's worth protecting, it's worth fighting for. But it's also worth understanding that liberty is the core value of what we have. And liberty is it's not even democracy that's the core value. I might suggest to you that I guess I'm a little bit like Winston Churchill. I guess that's pretty arrogant. I just mean a little bit like Winston Churchill. He was a great person. I'm just a little bit like him. But he said, democracy is the worst form of government ever invented except for everything else that's ever been tried. Which means, yeah, he's not too keen on democracy, but it's better than anything else. But the truth of the matter is, democracy is not a value. Democracy is an outcome. Democracy doesn't tell you what kinds of decisions you'll make. It's a way to make decisions. And frankly, if you're not careful about democracy, you can find that a democracy ignores the rights of people who are in the minority pretty pervasively. That's one of the problems with our endowing countries around the world with our favor just once they say they were democratically elected, because there are countries where people are democratically elected, they have such substantial majorities that they totally oppress minorities. Abuse them, sometimes literally kill them seek to exterminate them or at least expel them from the culture. You see, that's one of the reasons our Constitution is like it is. You think about the Constitution, in some respects, it's a set of safeguards, replete set of safeguards that are designed to make sure that we don't have an intoxicated runaway democracy that abuses individuals who are on the short end of the majority, meaning they're in the minority. So you have a fragmented government with an executive, a legislative, and judicial branches, and even in the legislative branch, it's fragmented in several parts, designed to restrain. And of course, you know, when the Constitution was originally offered to the people for ratification in the 1780s, what did they demand? No way we're gonna sign on to this Constitution unless you add a Bill of Rights. And these rights were designed to protect specific liberties. The first American liberty to be protected in the First Amendment is the right of free speech and the freedom of worship and the free from unreasonable search and seizure. And the beat goes on until you finally get down to the 9th and 10th Amendments. And in that Bill of Rights, it's saying, and by the way, if there are things we haven't mentioned, either by way of saying that they're prohibited or by way of authorization, we're reserving to other governments, the state governments, the opportunity to do those things. There is no sort of assumption that your rights and liberties can be infringed by the national government unless specifically authorized. That's how important liberty was to those individuals. That's why when we talk about liberty, we have to make sure that we understand that it is an outcome. And a society that is a liberty society generally is an opportunity society. I like to think of it in this way, that liberty societies are characterized by opportunities. As you decide that you want to become a benefit culture, where instead of supervising an environment of freedom, liberty, and opportunity, the government decides to begin providing benefits to people and distributing the benefits, there's a consequence to that. And that is that in order to distribute the benefits and regulate them, you have to build a bureaucracy. So benefit cultures are characterized by bureaucracies. Liberty cultures are characterized by opportunities. And this is a balance that we have to constantly work with to seek to develop the right outcome, if you will, for the United States as a matter of policy. And this is true whether it's in regard to national defense or whether it's true in regard to the administration of justice. It's true in virtually every aspect, and it's true for state and local entities as well as the federal government. My experience recently has been with the federal government, but in my 8 years as governor of the state of Missouri, I had to be conscious of these kinds of things, because I believe that the liberation of the potential of individuals is far more important, except in some instances where the regulation of that potential is necessary to the preservation and safeguarding of liberty. Now, one of the things that we've recently been debating and heard about is that some of the institutions that should be safeguarding the liberties of Americans may be infringing those liberties. And people are talking about a variety of things, including the Patriot Act, and they talk about surveillance and the use of what's called the FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, in order to develop the information that would be possible for us to use or available for us to use to thwart terrorism. Now, let me say right out of the box that the best friend of prevention is information. And especially when threats are as different as they have been in the past. You know, read that, what is it, John Adams' book, is the one about John Adams and who's the author, 1776. Anyhow, they're standing up over the Boston Harbor and they're watching the British fleet come. And they're saying, you know, about 2 hours those guys are going to arrive, and they'll be offloading their ships and all that stuff. Let's run down to Starbucks and have a cup of coffee, blah, blah. You know, a threat to a nation state was posed by instrumentalities of scale, armadas, big fleets. And the deliverability of the threat was limited to basically at least to the speed of the waterborne, sail-driven, wind-driven ships. The kind of threat that we endure now is far different. And our ability to respond has to be different, and we have to have the kind of informational base that will help us disrupt the threats. For the first couple hundred years, presidents relied on the Constitution of the United States and their responsibility to defend, as the commander-in-chief of the United States, for the collection of the information that would be necessary to default attacks on the United States. Woodrow Wilson in the First World War surveilled all the calls coming into the United States and all the calls going out of the United States, international calls, and opened and closed the mail going in and out of the United States to make sure that there weren't things happening that would disrupt the capacity of United States citizens to act in freedom. On the 8th day of December, I think that's the date it happened in 1941, the day after Pearl Harbor, Franklin Delano Roosevelt similarly began to surveil. And how did he do it? Well, it was under the president's power under the Constitution. And that power to develop information, to default attacks against the United States or disrupt them, was exercised pretty aggressively. But during the 1950s, and a time when very few of you here have the kind of antiquity that I do, but there was this kind of scare that the nuclear war was potentially imminent. The Soviet Union, then a large threat, might do something that would really impair our liberty, and there got to be far more surveillance than well, it may have been necessary, but it got out of hand. In the 1970s, the Senator Church from out west held what was called the Church Commission, and they developed the FISA law, which was the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which authorized the president to do certain kinds of surveillance, just to make sure that we had the information necessary to protect the country. And we operated under that act for quite some time. This won't be on the quiz or the final exam, so don't worry about this. But the point is, until just very recently, there wasn't much said about it, but in recent times, there's been some sense that the surveillance potential of the United States has been used politically. Charges have been made that, in fact, the FISA law has been weaponized so that people who are involved in politics could be surveilled. Now, that's a very serious charge, because the president's authority does not allow, neither does the FISA law, allow for the deployment of the instrumentalities of surveillance to achieve political purposes. They are for national defense purposes, and there are structures in that setting that require that there be safeguards, including what are called minimization requirements, meaning you have to throw away all the data you get that's not directly related to national security and stuff like that. And so we have a little bit of a crisis, and I believe there may be some things that we ought to be doing in regard to our national security to avoid the misuse or abuse of things like FISA in terms of the defense of the country. The FISA law provides that Justice Department officials or intelligence officials can go before a special court made up of U.S. District Court judges who are specially selected and sit for hearing these matters, and you make an application to surveil someone. And you give them information. Now, the point is that when you make that application, it's called an ex parte petition. Ex parte means that the person being surveilled isn't told about it. Now, you know it would be pretty useless to surveil a person if you told them you were going to be watching them. So it has to be ex parte. But what we have learned is that there were some petitions that were apparently based on things that only part of the truth was told. And at least the allegation is that there were other factors that should have been known to the judge granting the authority that wasn't known to the judge granting the authority. And that's a danger of an ex parte proceeding. And I think we ought to be considering amending our process in some way so as to safeguard against that. That is to either have some person whose job it is to cross-examine those who are making the petition for the surveillance, or sort of a guardian ad litem to insist on complete proof. I think it would also be important for us to have a statute, perhaps, that requires intelligence authorities who want the information to give all information, not just information that's in favor of granting the writ, but information, all information about the target, so that you give the judge the basis for making a judgment based on a broad understanding of the circumstance and person rather than on a select group of facts. You know, in our criminal law, we have a safeguard, and it's this. It's called the Brady Rule. If the prosecutor has information that shows that the defendant is innocent or tends to show that the defendant is innocent, the prosecutor has to give it to the defense attorney. But in a FISA application, there is no defense attorney. It's an ex parte proceeding, and perhaps we need a rule in the Justice Department or even a law passed by Congress that says we need a, quote, Brady approach to applications for surveillance that requires the agency applying for surveillance authority to in fact provide all information, including exculpatory information, information that would perhaps provide a basis for denying the application as well as the application. Those are the kinds of things that could be done to sort of enhance both the confidence of the American people in the system and the integrity of the system. And it may be time for us to do that. FISA came into existence in the 1970s, and it was used pervasively in the early years of this century during my time as Attorney General, but there haven't been, until recently, allegations that it was substantially misused. And if it's misused, it's a terrible affront to our understanding of liberty and the way liberty ought to be safeguarded. So I think there are things we can do to increase the confidence, and the confidence of the American people is important in this system. Now, you might say, well, doesn't the president have the authority to do this stuff without the FISA law? And I say, yeah, he does. For the first 200 years, or 180 or 90 years of our country, presidents did the surveillance that was necessary to the national security, did it on their own motion under their constitutional authority. Well, if that's the case, why would the president ever use one of these other devices? Well, presidents might want the comfort of doing it in a way that the people and their representative have asked him to do it. Now, I say that the president wouldn't have to follow FISA in most circumstances because you can't amend the Constitution of the United States with a statute. You can't say, we're going to have a statute that says this is the way it has to be done, if the president has the authority to do it another way under the Constitution. We all know from the 5th grade forward that you amend the Constitution of the United States by having a ratification by, or a nominated amendment go to the states, and then the states have to ratify it with a supermajority. But the president might well be a person that prefers to do things in a way that's consistent with the expression of the American people through the United States Congress. This idea of liberty is an idea that's important to the success of America. And we are the country that stands for liberty in ways that are not endorsed by many other settings. I mean, when the French decided to celebrate the United States of America, they didn't send us the Statue of Democracy. The French had seen what happens to a run-amok democracy without the safeguards that our Constitution provides. They had to invent a new way to execute people. They were so busy executing political opponents over there who weren't a part of the majority and as a result weren't favored by the democracy. But that's not the way we operate nor the way we want to operate. It's no wonder when they sought to celebrate what America really meant to the world that they sent us a statue of liberty. Again, I would just say I'm not against democracy, but it's not an end in itself. It's not a value. It's a process. It's the best process. It's the process most likely to be protective of people's rights, but it's not a process so likely to be protective that it doesn't need safeguarding in the framework of a constitution like the Constitution of the United States. So when we seek to defend liberty, when we seek to enshrine it, when we seek to respect it, I think we have to understand that the security is not a way to derogate it or to compromise it. It's a way to enhance it, to reinforce it, and to respect it. And with that in mind, it's something special. And indeed, when Emma Lazarus wrote, "Give me your tired, your poor," she wrote those words because she understood that liberty was this special catalyst that makes it possible for human achievement to be respected and human dignity to be honored in ways that would be productive and provide a pattern, not just for people in the United States, for around the world. No, we're not better than other people. We are other people. And if we have a commitment to the idea of liberty as the core value of our culture, we will continue to be an example, a lamp lifted, not just in the harbor of New York, but around the world, that signals what human potential and liberty can achieve and what freedom is all about. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you have. Sir.
My name is Sergei Tagashov.
I'm not running, I just want to see you.
And you spoke a lot about foreign policy, and my question is about that. For years, Americans have claimed that all they do in foreign affairs is to protect human rights and liberties. And my question is, how can the world trust Americans when at the same time, with stating these nice words, the US passes law like Patriot Act and other laws that curtail freedoms and human rights in America, because the Patriot Act curtails the right to privacy for American citizens. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm tempted to sort of make my speech over again, because I wanted to say that when we pass laws like the things that help us defend our liberties, we're not curtailing liberty. We are, in fact, in reinforcing liberty, making it possible for people to live in freedom. And the defense of this country against terrorist acts is a fundamental responsibility and opportunity to defend liberty, not to impair liberty. And I really believe that around the world, people, it's hard for me to stand still, but believe that we defend and respect liberty here substantially, or people wouldn't be so eager to come here. People wouldn't stream here by the thousands and wouldn't have come here through the centuries if they thought this was a place that they could not achieve their potential and they didn't have the liberty for achievement. And, you know, my own family, 3 out of 4 of my grandparents were born overseas. My grandfather didn't talk about Wisconsin, but he said, if I can't find a job in the United States, I go back to Minnesota. So, I mean, whatever that was. That's no extra charge for that. Are there other questions? Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Sure.
Hi, my name is Alec Lockhart. I'm a senior here. And so in your speech, you were talking about this idea that we as Americans are not necessarily special compared to other people around the world, which I thought was a noble kind of value. But
N-O-B-U-L-L or N-O-B-L-E?
You can take your pick.
Okay.
But there are some ways in which we do kind of stand out from other countries in the world. I think one of the most notable is the fact that we are the most incarcerated country in the world. These are statistics from 2013, but we make up 4% of the world's population, but 22% of the world's incarcerated population. So could you speak to the way that incarcerating human beings enhances others' liberties?
Yeah.
And maybe to the fact that certain types of people are more likely to end up in those places, and certain other types of people, their liberty may be enhanced by that. Thank you.
Well, I think the people who are most likely to end up incarcerated are people who commit crimes. And we are very careful about that in this country. We have a robust system of appeals. If you're convicted of a crime, you have, first of all, safeguards that exceed the safeguards in virtually any other culture in the world. Secondly, you have an appeal that usually goes to most crimes are state crimes. They go to a state court of appeals and then the state Supreme Court and ultimately to the United States Supreme Court. So we are very careful about this. Now, the reason we do that, and for no other reason at all, is that it provides a safe and secure environment in which other people can exercise their liberties. And there are times when I've been in favor of incarcerating people who commit crimes and threaten the safety and security of others. And I don't have any regrets about that, except that it's a wasted life and a wasted potential when people eventually abuse others to the extent that they have to be incarcerated. And occasionally you'll see an article in the paper. The New York Times used to run this all the time during my time as Attorney General, saying incarceration rates high in spite of low crime level. And as if I say, well, duh, if you put people committing crimes behind bars, your crime level will go down. And when I became Attorney General, we set out an objective to reduce the level of gun violence, the number of crimes committed using guns in the country. Happened to be my view, not everybody's view, that the way to reduce gun crime was to punish gun crime rather than just proliferate gun laws. And we did that, and we had the lowest percentage of crimes committed using guns in the history of the United States by the end of my time as Attorney General. Now, yeah, we put some people in jail, and we advertise the fact that if you use guns in the commission of crime, you're more likely to go to jail than if you don't use the gun in the commission of crime. So the jail becomes incarceration, pardon me, I'll use a more acceptable term if that's what you used, and I respect that. Incarceration becomes a tool for ensuring and enforcing the liberty and security and safety of the citizens of this country. And I don't apologize for that. I took an oath to try and make that the case. People are sent, I don't know of people sent to jail who aren't committing crimes. Now, whether or not you want to disagree with what ought to be a crime and not, there's a big debate going on in this country right now, primarily in the area of drugs, whether drugs ought to be criminalized or not. But I don't know whether you think some dictator ought to come in and say they're not criminal anymore, and therefore we're not going to incarcerate people, or whether you ought to call upon the Congress of the United States or your state legislature, or probably, I don't know whether you have initiative in referendum in Wisconsin, you ought to make a decision about what's a crime and what's not a crime. But my view has always been that if it's a crime, the rule of law being very important as a component of liberty, then you ought to enforce it. And if it's a bad law and you get too much enforcement, somebody in the legislative branch ought to, wake up and decide that it's not a crime. If it's not a crime, and if it is a crime, we live with it. We can't have it both ways. I'm afraid that's what we've had recently. We've been looking the other way on marijuana. The federal government says it's a controlled substance, Schedule I, which means there is no known medical or other use authority to have marijuana, and the states around the country are all, yesterday, my home state of Missouri said medical marijuana is now, the green light is, not green light, the wrong, but anyhow, the okay light is on for marijuana. Well, I think that's bad for the country. Either it's against the law or not against the law. And whether it ought to be a federal law or a state law, that's another important issue. But when crimes are committed, I think we can, now you can also debate whether or not incarceration is the best way to handle crimes. What are the things you can do with people? You could reduce prison population on the one extreme, you execute criminals. I don't think anybody wants to do that. On another extreme, you could turn them all loose, say, don't you ever do again, and everybody stand up and go, shame on you. Or you could fine them. There are a whole range of things to do. These are policy questions, and this is on your doorstep. You're going to run the country. This is what you're for. That's why you're in this college, to be, to to learn to make good judgments about policy issues. And those relate to incarceration and whether we incarcerate too many people for too many acts or too many, but those decisions have already been made and they're subject to reversal. You know, one of the things that this taxation without representation was at the beginning of the country. Well, regulation without representation is what happens when a law stays in effect and the people who are eventually the subject to the law do nothing about it and just live under it if they don't like it. Stuff that's been committed by somebody else, if it's a generation before you, you have every right to reverse. That's what freedom's about. That's what liberty's about. Liberty isn't a one-shot deal where somebody makes a judgment in 1 year and forever after you're bound by it. So I invite you, if there are things that ought to be corrected, get after the correction. And I'm stunned that our Congress doesn't do something, that it's content to have the disrespect for law that it has. Because we're looking the other way on all kinds of immigration laws. If you don't want them, let's not have them. Let's get them off the books. If you do want them, let's enforce them. But let's not pretend, that we're just going to close our eyes and wish real tight and wish with all our might and everything will be all right in the morning. I think rule of law is important.
No,
I'm not going to hurt you.
No. No worries. But
I'll
hi.
surveil you, but I won't hurt you.
Huh?
I'm just teasing.
Oh, yeah. Hi, my name is Jack Chelsky. I'm an international relations major here.
Yeah.
And during your panel, I thought that it was interesting about the sacrifices that we make in terms of liberty for security. And when you were talking about foreign policy and the type of regimes that we recognize and the ideal liberty in these countries, I couldn't help but think about the United States' relationship with Saudi Arabia, and in terms of the world and global terrorism and how that impedes on multiple countries, and whether it's in the Middle East or South Asia or here. The spread of the strong conservative Islamic idea of Wahhabism is directly funded by Saudi Arabia, and there was 15 hijackers during 9/11 that had Saudi passports, and they had connections to Al-Qaeda, ISIS, al-Nusra during the Syrian civil war right now, and that's one of the United States' closest allies. So I guess I would like to hear an explanation as to why that is, because terrorism is obviously completely against liberty.
I think terrorism is against liberty, and that you raise a very important set of complex circumstances. We need a presence in defending the United States' interests around the world, and sometimes in doing that we compromise with countries that don't have the same kind of regard for liberty that we do. And anybody who thinks that the value placed on individual liberties in Saudi Arabia is parallel to or consistent with the values we placed here, I think is not seeing clearly. So my judgment is that it's been a. Do you want to argue already?
Yeah, I just wanted to hear an explanation as to why we invaded Iraq and instead didn't do anything with Saudi Arabia after
9/11. First of all, I didn't make that decision. I don't make those decisions. I don't know why. Pardon? Oh, sure I was, and you were a part of the citizenship, and you have a right to ask the question. The question of whether we should have invaded Iraq, the reason that was given at the time, which I think was believed by the individuals who made the decision, was that Iraq posed a kind of threat to the security of the United States that Saudi Arabia didn't. And the kind of threat not only to the United States, but to the region. And that threat would have been defined by weapons of mass destruction. And by that, I don't think it's fair to limit that only to nuclear weapons, but to chemical weapons and to other kinds of weapons, which and frankly are used from time to time in the Middle East, and have even recently been used. And the response that was made to Saudi Arabia was based upon a belief by the individuals making that response that our national interest required us to curtail that threat. Now, there are lots of times in history you look back and people will say, well, maybe we shouldn't have done that, or maybe we should have, but you ask for the reason that it was done. It's my understanding that the reason that it was done was that it was considered to be a threat that to the national interests of the United States in such a way that it required action to be taken. And there were some things that built the credibility of that, of course. It's not that they hadn't exercised those kinds of capacities. They had not too long in it before then taken over another country in the Middle East. I believe that was Kuwait. And so you get the situation where you have somebody in possession of, or believed to be in, or who brags about possession of weapons of mass destruction and what they're going to do with them. And they have recently been aggressive and overrunning other countries in the region. I think that provides a basis for a belief. Now, you can say, well, it was an ill-founded belief and they never found nuclear weapons. And it may well have been that Saddam Hussein wanted to brag about having nuclear weapons so that he could have a different bargaining position with the United States. It turned out not to be a bargain which was good for him, but it may not have been good for the United States either. Or the world, that's right. And you know, pardon? And what?
I think there's another question.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Kyle Swinford, and I have kind of two questions. Number one, my whole family voted for you every time since 1984, even when you lost. And also I learned...
Well, God will forgive them for that, I'm sure.
And they're all from Missouri, and actually I learned that my aunt taught your kid in 3rd grade. So my whole family wants me to have a picture with you, so if I could have that, it'd make me really happy.
Could destroy your family's reputation, but that's up to you. I'll be glad to.
And number two, what's one regret that you had as that you didn't, like something you didn't do? Like what's one regret that you didn't do when you were Attorney General?
Oh, what I should have done but I didn't do? I thought because the Patriot Act was so poorly explained. We put the Patriot Act together between the Tuesday attack and the Saturday where we went to get the different authorities. And what we basically did was to sweep through the criminal law system of the United States and get authorities that we used against organized crime and other criminal actors, and we put it together so we could use it against terrorism. And let me give you an example. The Patriot Act was designed to provide for what was called roving wiretaps for terrorism purpose. Now, the phrase roving wiretaps is a sinister sounding phrase. I mean, it really it conjures up the idea of a bunch of FBI guys in trench coats with big alligator clips going and just roving around and clipping onto. Roving wiretaps doesn't mean you can go and tap anybody's wire you want to. But it meant that instead of the order for surveillance going to an instrument like a specific telephone, that the order was the right to tap the communications of a specific person. Now, this had been in place since the 1980s for drug dealers and other kinds of organized crime, but it didn't exist in the war on terror. And you understand that when telephones first existed, if you tapped somebody's phone, they did all their communication from that location on that phone. But you get into the modern day when people are buying, and what happened in the 1980s with the drug community is they would buy a new phone every week at the local 7-Eleven or wherever it is that they got it. And they would throw away the phone, and by the time you got a court order to get to tap the new phone, they'd throw that one away because they were disposable, especially in high stakes transactions. So since 1988, we had the, quote, roving wiretap, which meant that no matter where a person took the phone and what phone he was using, you had the right to listen to him or her. And we wanted that to be true for following terrorists as well. So we added that. But the idea that it was a roving wiretap, it sounded terrible. And frankly, we passed it so handily in the period shortly after the 9/11 that it wasn't adequately explained to the people. And it caused, that's one of the regrets I have. I don't live my life in the rearview mirror, and I have probably a lot of regrettable things that I should regret, but I don't think much about them. But communicating these things to the American people in an understandable way is one of the things I should have done a better job of.
Okay, so that was the last question. We want to be respectful of your time here. So if we could give a round of applause and thank you for Mr. Ashcroft for coming up.
Thank you very much.
It's time to let the mighty eagle soar once more. Let the eagle soar like she's never soared before. From rocky coast to golden shore, let the mighty eagle soar, soar with healing in her wings, as the land beneath her sings. Only God, no other kings. Let the mighty eagle soar. Let the eagle soar like she's never soared before. From rocky coast to golden shore, let the mighty eagle soar, soar with healing in her wings, as the land beneath her sings. Only God, no other kings. Let the mighty eagle soar. Only God, no other kings. Let the mighty eagle soar. Thank you and God bless you.